My mother-in-law stole my vintage skeleton key collection to buy a phone. My wife bailed her out with our savings. My mother-in-law has been a financial leech our entire marriage. Constantly broke despite living in a paid-off house, surviving on Social Security, no real expenses. She just spends everything on hoarding garbage until her house became unlivable. Rodents, mold, every room packed except the master bedroom she converted into a studio apartment. Last week, she demanded I buy her a new smartphone as a gift. When I refused, she literally dropped to her knees crying, then screamed we're supposed to pamper her in her old age. My wife Sunshine begged me to just give her the money. I refused. I collect vintage skeleton keys, 10 years building this collection. Railroad keys, ornate sergeants, hotel keys from the 1800s, worth about $4,000 total, some pieces irreplaceable. Kept them in a locked display cabinet in our living room. 3 days after the phone incident, I came home to find the cabinet forced open, my entire collection gone. Checked our security camera. There was my mother-in-law with a crowbar, loading my keys into boxes she'd brought. Called her immediately. She laughed, actually laughed, and said she'd already pawned them all for her new phone. "Should have just bought it for me," she said. "Your fault I had to do this." Sunshine seemed upset until I said I was calling the police. Then she begged me not to, said I should just start a new collection. These keys took me 10 years to find. Some are one of a kind. I refused to let it go. Sunshine screamed at me, but I called the cops anyway. Before they arrived, I texted my MIL, baiting her into admitting everything. She bragged about selling them, called my collection tacky, even told me which pawn shop and that she got $300. $300 for $4,000 worth of antique keys. Police took it seriously, arrested her that day, retrieved my collection from the pawn shop. The shop owner said she'd claimed the keys belonged to her deceased husband. She's not even a widow. Her ex divorced her 15 years ago. Sunshine paid the pawn shop back from our joint account without telling me. When she got home, we had our biggest fight ever. I told her I was done enabling her toxic mother, changing the locks, and we needed marriage counseling or I'd consider separation. Instead of begging me to reconsider, she packed a suitcase and left for a motel, dramatically pausing like she expected me to stop her. I didn't. Next morning, she texted demanding I transfer money for her mother's bail since I got her arrested. I refused. She responded with just, "Wow." Then I checked our joint account. She'd withdrawn enough for bail plus the pawn shop repayment. Found her at a cheap motel nearby that evening. When I confronted her about the money, she said, since I wouldn't pay bail for the woman I had arrested, she got the money from me anyway. Called it karma and threatened to call the cops if I didn't leave. That night, I knew my marriage was over. Changed the locks, removed my contributions from the joint account, stopped all automatic payments. She wanted a financial doormat, not a husband. We make similar incomes, so I'm pushing for a clean split. She can have her thieving mother all to herself now. But yesterday, my lawyer called with unexpected news. During discovery, he found something odd in Sunshine's finances. Multiple large transfers to an account that wasn't her mother's. When he traced it, it belonged to someone named Carl, Sunshine's co-worker she carpools with. The same guy whose name appeared on a lease for an apartment Sunshine signed as co-tenant 6 months ago. My wife has been living a double life, using her mother's constant crises as cover for why she was always gone, why money kept disappearing. Her mother knew. She's been helping Sunshine hide the affair in exchange for Sunshine paying her bills. But here's what made my blood run cold. Sunshine's pregnant. 3 months along. We haven't been intimate in 4 months because she claimed she had a medical issue. She's been telling everyone we're having fertility struggles. But Carl posted ultrasound photos on Instagram last week with the caption, "Can't wait to meet you, little one." The timestamp shows it was taken the same day Sunshine supposedly took her mother to a doctor's appointment. I hired a private investigator this morning. What he found in just 3 hours destroyed me. Sunshine and Carl aren't just having an affair. They're married. She committed bigamy 5 months ago in Vegas. The girls' trip she took for her friend's birthday. There are photos of them at a chapel. Sunshine in a white dress, Carl in a suit, both wearing wedding rings I've never seen. The investigator found more. Sunshine's been slowly selling my things on Facebook Marketplace. My watches, sports memorabilia, electronics I thought were in storage. She's furnished their entire apartment with items from our house. But the skeleton keys weren't meant for a phone. The investigator showed me security footage from the pawn shop. Sunshine was there with her mother. They pawned the keys together. The $300 wasn't for a phone, it was a storage unit deposit. My mother-in-law only stole half my collection. The other half has been disappearing piece by piece for months, replaced with replicas. Yesterday, someone tried to take out a $50,000 loan against our house using my forged signature. The application came from Carl's IP address. Sunshine's been systematically destroying my life while planning her escape. But tonight, I found something that changes everything. Sunshine's not pregnant with Carl's baby. The ultrasound she showed him is fake, downloaded from a pregnancy website. She's scamming him too. There's just one problem. Sunshine really is pregnant, just not with his baby, or mine. I walked into Bethany Schroeder's office at 9 the next morning, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the investigator's folder twice on the way from the parking lot. She stood up from behind her desk when she saw me, took one look at my face and pointed to the chair. I sat down hard and pushed the folder across to her. She opened it, started reading, and her face changed. She looked up at me after about 30 seconds. "Who's the biological father?" I shook my head. "I don't know. That's what I need you to help me figure out." She flipped through more pages, studying the fake ultrasound evidence Corbin had found, the real medical records he'd somehow gotten access to, the timeline that proved Sunshine couldn't be carrying Carl's baby or mine. Her phone rang right then. She glanced at the screen and answered it on speaker. Bethany Schroeder. "Mrs. Schroeder, this is Corbin. I need to speak with your client immediately. I found something overnight." Bethany looked at me. I nodded. "He's here with me now." "You're on speaker." "There's a third man," Corbin said. His voice sounded tired, like he'd been up all night. "His name is Ryan. Works in Sunshine's building, different company, same floor. They've been seeing each other for 6 months. I pulled security footage from the building. They leave together at least twice a week, always during lunch, always to the same hotel 3 blocks away. The timeline matches her pregnancy exactly. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. 3 men. Sunshine had been juggling 3 men, and I'd been so stupid I hadn't seen any of it. Bethany started writing notes fast. "Can you send me everything you have on this Ryan? Already in your email. Photos, timeline, hotel receipts I got from a contact. He's married too. Wife's name is Jennifer. 2 kids. He has no idea Sunshine's married to anyone." Bethany thanked him and hung up. She looked at me for a long moment. "This changes everything. Sunshine's bigamy charge is a felony in our state. Combined with the fraud, the forgery, the identity theft, the theft of your property, she's looking at serious prison time. The prosecutor will probably offer a plea deal, but we need to decide right now how hard you want to push this. Do you want to focus on criminal charges and see her in jail? Or do you want to focus on protecting your assets in the divorce and let the criminal stuff be secondary?" I didn't even have to think about it. Both. I want to pursue both tracks at the same time. That's going to be expensive. 2 separate legal processes running at once. I don't care. Sunshine's pattern shows she won't stop unless someone forces her to stop. She's been stealing from me for months, maybe years. She married another man while married to me. She's scamming a 3rd man with a fake pregnancy while actually pregnant with a 4th man's baby. If I just focus on the divorce, she'll find some way to keep hurting people. She needs to face real consequences. Bethany nodded slowly. "Okay. I'll start filing motions today to freeze all your joint accounts. We'll get restraining orders, preventing her from accessing or selling any more of your property. I'll also contact the prosecutor's office and make sure they know we're cooperating fully on the criminal side. This is going to move fast once it starts." She started typing on her computer, pulling up forms and documents. I sat there watching her work, trying to process everything. 3 men. Sunshine had been living 3 separate lives, keeping all of us in the dark, stealing from all of us. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. "This is Detective Evan Montes with the Fraud Division. Am I speaking with the homeowner at 2847 Maple Drive?" "Yes, that's me." "Sir, I need you to come down to the station this afternoon for a formal interview regarding a fraudulent loan application. The bank's fraud department has been investigating for 2 days. We found the IP address that submitted the application. It belongs to a Carl Brooks. Does that name mean anything to you?" I looked at Bethany. She was watching me, listening. "Yes, that's my wife's boyfriend, or husband. She married him 5 months ago in Vegas." There was a pause on the other end. "Your wife married someone else while married to you?" "Yes. I just found out yesterday. I'm sitting in my lawyer's office right now dealing with it. Sir, I'm going to need you to come in as soon as possible. Can you be here by 2 this afternoon?" I looked at Bethany again. She nodded. "I'll be there." I spent the next 3 hours at the police station in a small interview room that smelled like old coffee and cleaning chemicals. Detective Montes was maybe 40, built like he used to play football, with tired eyes that said he'd seen too much. He had me walk through everything from the beginning. The skeleton keys, my mother-in-law's arrest, Sunshine leaving, discovering the affair, hiring Corbin, finding out about the bigamy, the fake pregnancy, the real pregnancy, the third man named Ryan. He took notes the whole time, occasionally stopping me to ask questions or have me clarify something. Then he showed me printouts of my bank statements, my credit reports, loan applications I'd never seen before. Someone had been trying to access my accounts for months. Small attempts at first, testing the waters, then bigger ones. The $50,000 loan against my house was just the latest. We're building cases against both your wife and potentially Carl Brooks, if he was knowingly involved in the fraud attempts. The IP address evidence is strong, but we need to establish whether he knew he was committing fraud or if your wife was using his computer without his knowledge. Can I ask you something? I said. He nodded. How does someone do this? How does someone live 3 separate lives and keep it all straight? Detective Montes leaned back in his chair. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen people run elaborate cons that lasted decades. The truth is, most people aren't paying attention. They trust the people they love. They don't question things that seem slightly off because they want to believe everything's okay. Your wife counted on that. She counted on you, Carl, and Ryan all being too trusting or too busy to compare notes. He was right. I'd been too trusting. I'd believed Sunshine when she said she had a medical issue. I'd believed her when she said she was helping her mother. I'd believed her about fertility struggles and doctor's appointments and girls' trips. I'd believed everything because I loved her and I wanted our marriage to work. I left the police station at 5 with copies of all the reports and a promise from Detective Montes that he'd keep me updated. Bethany called while I was driving home. Corbin's wife Megan had been going through my financial records all afternoon. She specialized in financial fraud, apparently. She'd found something bad. Credit cards opened in my name over the past year. 5 different cards, all maxed out, total debt approaching $35,000. Every single purchase was for furniture, electronics, kitchen stuff, decorations. Sunshine had been furnishing her apartment with Carl using my credit, and I'd never known because she'd been intercepting the statements somehow. I pulled over into a gas station parking lot and just sat there with the engine running. $35,000 in debt I didn't know about. On top of everything else she'd stolen. On top of the fake ultrasounds and the bigamy and the systematic destruction of my life. I called Bethany back. I need to file a police report for identity theft. I'll send you the forms. You'll also need to start disputing the fraudulent accounts with the credit bureaus. I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to take months to resolve fully. But the criminal charges against Sunshine will help prove you weren't responsible for the debt. I drove home in a daze, filed the police report online, started the dispute process with all 3 credit bureaus. It was almost 8 when my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered it anyway. Is this Sunshine's husband? The voice was male, young, shaking. Who is this? My name is Carl. I need to know if you're really Sunshine's husband because my sister just found your wedding photos online, and I need to know if this is real or if she's lying about this too. I closed my eyes. Here it was, the moment when Sunshine's other victim finally figured it out. Yes, I'm Sunshine's husband. We got married 7 years ago. We're still legally married. She committed bigamy when she married you in Vegas. He made a sound like someone had hit him. Then he started asking questions fast, his voice getting higher and more panicked with each one. How long had I known about him? Did I know about the baby? Did I know about the apartment? Was Sunshine really pregnant? I answered what I could, trying to keep my voice steady. Finally, I told him we needed to talk in person. We needed to compare notes and figure out exactly what Sunshine had done to both of us. He agreed immediately. We made plans to meet at a coffee shop the next day at 10 in the morning. I showed up 15 minutes early and ordered black coffee I didn't want. Carl walked in right at 10, and I knew it was him immediately. Tall, thin, wearing a nice suit like he'd come straight from work. He looked around the coffee shop until he spotted me. I raised my hand. He came over and sat down across from me without ordering anything. His eyes were red. He'd been crying. She told me you were abusive, he said. His voice was quiet. She said you hit her, that she was filing for divorce, that she just needed time to get away safely. She said the reason we had to keep everything secret was because you were dangerous. I never hit her. Not once. I didn't even know she was having an affair until 3 days ago. He put his face in his hands. We sat there for a minute while he pulled himself together. Then he looked up at me. Is she really pregnant? Yes, but not with your baby. The ultrasound photos she showed you were fake, downloaded from a pregnancy website. She's actually pregnant, just not with your baby. Or mine. There's a third man named Ryan. Carl's face went white. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, opened Instagram, showed me the ultrasound photos he'd posted, the ones with the caption about meeting his baby. I told everyone, my whole family, my friends, everyone at work. I posted these online. Everyone thinks I'm going to be a dad. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. We were both victims of the same woman. Both of us had been lied to, manipulated, used. Both of us had believed we were building a future with someone who'd never had any intention of being honest with either of us. We spent the next 2 hours comparing notes, showing each other evidence, building a timeline of Sunshine's lies. Carl had copies of their Vegas wedding photos. I had copies of our wedding certificate. He had text messages where Sunshine promised they'd start their real life together once she finalized her divorce from me. I had bank statements showing she'd been stealing from me to pay for their apartment. By the time we finished, we had a complete picture of Sunshine's double life, and it was worse than either of us had imagined. Carl pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages with Sunshine, his hands shaking as he showed me screen after screen of her promises. She told him she was finalizing her divorce from her abusive ex, that she just needed a few more weeks to get away safely, that they'd start their real life together once the paperwork went through. The messages went back months, each one painting me as someone dangerous she needed to escape. She said I controlled all the money, that I tracked her movements, that she was scared to leave because I'd threatened her. None of it was true. I'd never laid a hand on her, never controlled her finances, never even raised my voice until the day her mother stole my skeleton keys. Carl looked sick as he scrolled through the texts, his face getting paler with each message. He showed me one where Sunshine said she couldn't wear her wedding ring around me because I'd get violent if I knew she'd moved on. Another where she claimed I'd emptied their joint account to punish her for trying to leave. I showed him my bank records proving I'd only removed my contributions after she drained the account for her mother's bail. We sat there comparing our evidence, and the full picture of Sunshine's manipulation became clear. She'd been using both of us for different things while maintaining a third relationship with Ryan that neither of us knew about. Carl had money from a trust fund his grandfather left him, so Sunshine married him in Vegas to get access to those resources. I had the house and stable income, so she stayed legally married to me to keep her claim on our assets. Ryan apparently worked in tech and made good money, so she'd gotten pregnant with his baby to trap him into providing child support. She'd played us all, crafting different stories for each man to keep us separated and funding her lifestyle. Carl started crying when I showed him the fake ultrasound photos he'd posted on Instagram. The investigator had traced them to a pregnancy website where people downloaded stock images for announcements. Sunshine had never been pregnant with his baby. She'd scammed him as thoroughly as she'd scammed me, using his excitement about becoming a father to keep him invested in their fake marriage. He'd told his entire family, posted about it on social media, started buying baby furniture for their apartment. All of it based on lies. The next morning, Carl's sister Nadia called him demanding to know what was happening. She worked in banking and had gotten suspicious when Carl asked her advice about opening a joint account with Sunshine. Nadia had done some digging through public records and found both marriage certificates, mine and the Vegas one. She was furious that her brother had been manipulated into a bigamous marriage and wanted to help expose Sunshine's crimes. Nadia offered to trace Sunshine's financial activities using her banking connections, and within 2 days, she'd uncovered a complex web of accounts and transfers. Sunshine had been systematically moving money between multiple accounts for over a year, hiding funds in her mother's name, in fake business accounts, in offshore transfers that looked legitimate but were designed to hide assets before an eventual divorce. Nadia documented everything and sent it to Bethany, who immediately hired a forensic accountant to verify the findings. The accountant spent a week going through every transaction and confirmed that Sunshine had hidden approximately $85,000 in various accounts over the past 2 years. Some of it was my money from our joint account, withdrawn in small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. Some of it was Carl's money from his trust fund that Sunshine had convinced him to transfer for their future together. The rest came from selling my possessions on Facebook Marketplace My watches and sports memorabilia and electronics, all carefully sold, and the money laundered through her mother's accounts to make it harder to trace. The accountant found evidence of systematic fraud going back years, long before Sunshine had even met Carl. She'd been planning this for a long time. 3 days later, Bethany called to tell me Detective Montes was making his move. Sunshine was arrested at her workplace that morning on charges of bigamy, fraud, forgery, identity theft, and grand larceny. I didn't go to watch, but Carl did. He said the police showed up at her office around 10 in the morning and walked her out in handcuffs in front of all her co-workers. Sunshine had spent years building this professional reputation as a hard-working, honest employee, and it all came crashing down in one dramatic perp walk that became the talk of her office. People she'd worked with for years watched as she was loaded into a police car, crying and screaming that this was all a mistake. The same day, Detective Montes arrested Sunshine's mother as an accessory to theft and fraud for her role in pawning my skeleton keys and helping hide Sunshine's criminal activities. Both women were held on $100,000 bail each, which neither of them could afford. Sunshine's mother called me from jail begging me to post her bail, saying she was just trying to help her daughter and didn't understand she was breaking the law. I hung up on her. Sterling Lockhart, the criminal defense attorney Sunshine hired, contacted Bethany 2 days after the arrest, trying to negotiate a plea deal. He admitted the evidence against Sunshine was overwhelming and he wanted to minimize her prison time. He suggested Sunshine cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges, maybe get her sentenced down to 2 years if she gave up information about other people involved. Bethany called me to discuss the offer, and I told her absolutely not. I refused any deal that didn't include full restitution of every dollar Sunshine stole, a confession to all crimes and significant prison time. Bethany supported my position because Sunshine's pattern of calculated deception showed she wasn't going to change without serious consequences. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. Sunshine had spent years systematically destroying my life while planning her escape, and she'd done it all without remorse. Carl called me the next day and said he'd decided to cooperate with the prosecution. He was providing extensive documentation of Sunshine's lies and manipulation, including all their text messages, copies of their fake marriage certificate, bank records showing the money transfers, and his testimony about the fake pregnancy. His evidence about the ultrasound photos and bigamous marriage strengthened the case significantly because it showed Sunshine's pattern of fraud extended beyond just financial crimes. 2 weeks after Sunshine's arrest, the ultrasound technician who'd performed Sunshine's actual pregnancy scan confirmed through medical records that Sunshine was 12 weeks pregnant, not 3 months, like she'd claimed to Carl. The dates didn't match up with anything Sunshine had told either of us. Detective Montes tracked down the biological father, a guy named Ryan who worked at Sunshine's company in a different department. Ryan came forward after being contacted by police and admitted he'd been having an affair with Sunshine for 6 months, but had no idea she was married to anyone. He thought she was single. When Detective Montes told him about the pregnancy, Ryan went white and said his wife was going to kill him. Ryan spent the next 2 days calling me repeatedly, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and ended desperate. He wanted to meet in person to explain everything, said he had no idea Sunshine was married to anyone, claimed she told him she was divorced and starting fresh. I finally agreed to meet him at a diner near his office, mostly because Detective Montes said it would help the case if I could get Ryan on record about Sunshine's lies. Ryan showed up looking terrible, dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking as he ordered coffee he didn't drink. He pulled out his phone and showed me texts from Sunshine going back 6 months, all carefully crafted to make her seem single and available. She told him she worked in marketing at a different company, said she was renting an apartment alone after a bad breakup, even sent him photos of herself at places I recognized as our house, but cropped, so nothing identifiable showed. Ryan's wife had found out about the affair 2 days earlier when Detective Montes contacted him, and she'd filed for divorce that same afternoon. He kept apologizing, saying he never would have gotten involved if he'd known the truth, but I barely listened because I was too busy forwarding his texts to Bethany. The prosecutor called me that evening and said they now had enough evidence to charge Sunshine with multiple counts of fraud, bigamy, identity theft, and grand larceny. Ryan had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity, and Carl was doing the same. Sunshine's co-workers started coming forward after her arrest became office gossip, providing statements about her constant lies regarding doctor appointments and family emergencies that never actually happened. The forensic accountant Megan hired traced every dollar Sunshine had stolen or fraudulently obtained, building a financial trail that showed systematic theft over 2 years. Sterling called Bethany 3 days later, asking for a meeting to discuss a possible plea deal. We met at Bethany's office, and Sterling looked uncomfortable as he laid out Sunshine's situation. He had copies of all the evidence against her, stacked in 3 thick folders on the conference table. Sterling admitted the case against Sunshine was overwhelming and that taking it to trial would result in a much longer sentence than if she accepted a plea deal now. He proposed Sunshine plead guilty to bigamy, fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny in exchange for a recommended sentence of 4 years in prison with mandatory restitution payments. Bethany looked at me, and I shook my head immediately. I told Sterling I wanted full restitution of every dollar Sunshine stole, a detailed confession to all crimes, and I wouldn't agree to anything less than the 4 years. Sterling nodded and said he'd present the offer to Sunshine, but warned she might reject it and force a trial. 2 days later, Sterling called back and said Sunshine had accepted the plea deal after he showed her the mountain of evidence and explained she'd likely get 8 to 10 years if convicted at trial. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following week, and I took the day off work to attend. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as we waited for the judge to arrive. Sunshine sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, looking nothing like the woman I'd married. She didn't look at me once during the entire hearing. The judge entered and everyone stood. Then we sat back down as the clerk called the case. Sterling stood and outlined the plea agreement, explaining that Sunshine would plead guilty to 4 felony charges in exchange for a recommended sentence of 4 years in state prison with mandatory restitution. The prosecutor stood and added that Sunshine had agreed to full financial disclosure and cooperation in recovering all stolen assets. The judge asked Sunshine if she understood the charges against her, and if she was pleading guilty voluntarily. Sunshine's voice was barely audible as she said yes to both questions. The judge went through each charge individually, asking Sunshine to confirm her guilt, and each time she answered yes in that same quiet voice. Then the judge started adding conditions that weren't in the original plea agreement. Full financial disclosure meant Sunshine had to provide access to every account, every asset, every source of income for the next 10 years. Mandatory restitution payments would start immediately upon her release and continue until every dollar was repaid with interest. Sunshine was prohibited from opening any financial accounts without court supervision for 10 years after release. She couldn't take out loans, couldn't apply for credit cards, couldn't make any major purchases without filing paperwork with the court. The judge explained these conditions were necessary because Sunshine's crimes showed a pattern of sophisticated financial deception that required long-term monitoring. Sunshine started crying as the judge spoke, tears running down her face as the reality of her situation finally hit her. Sterling tried to object to the additional conditions, but the judge shut him down quickly, saying Sunshine was lucky to get only 4 years given the scope of her crimes. The judge accepted the plea deal with all the added conditions and scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Sunshine broke down completely as the bailiff led her out of the courtroom, sobbing so hard she could barely walk. Sunshine's mother had her own hearing 3 days later in a different courtroom. Her public defender had negotiated a lighter sentence because her role was primarily as an accessory rather than the main perpetrator. She pleaded guilty to theft and fraud charges related to the skeleton keys and received 18 months in county jail plus 3 years probation. The judge ordered her to pay full restitution for the keys and testify truthfully about Sunshine's activities if called as a witness. She looked angry throughout the entire hearing, glaring at me like this was all my fault instead of the consequences of her own actions. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I expected since Sunshine couldn't contest anything from jail. Bethany filed all the paperwork within a week of the plea hearing, and because Sunshine had pled guilty to fraud and theft against me, the judge granted everything I requested. I got the house, all my remaining possessions, and a judgment for full restitution of every dollar Sunshine had stolen or fraudulently obtained. The total came to over $90,000 when everything was calculated, including the items she'd sold on Facebook Marketplace, the fraudulent credit cards, the money transferred to Carl, and various other thefts. Bethany warned me that collecting the full amount would take years, possibly decades, since Sunshine would be making minimum wage prison jobs and whatever employment she could find after release. The judgment included interest that would compound annually, so the amount Sunshine owed would keep growing until it was paid off. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks after Sunshine's arrest, officially ending our marriage and legally separating all our finances. Carl called me a few days after my divorce was finalized and asked if I wanted to grab coffee. We met at the same diner where I'd met Ryan, and Carl looked better than the last time I'd seen him, less shell-shocked and more resigned to his situation. He'd been working with Nadia to repair his credit and undo the financial damage Sunshine had caused. Nadia had discovered Sunshine had opened 2 credit cards in Carl's name without his knowledge, running up nearly $15,000 in debt that Carl was now disputing. She'd also found that Sunshine had forged Carl's signature on a lease renewal for their apartment, committing him to another year of rent payments for a place he no longer wanted to live in. Carl was fighting to break that lease and recovering the security deposit Sunshine had paid using money she'd stolen from me. We started meeting regularly after that, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for lunch, comparing notes on the legal processes we were both navigating. It felt strange at first, becoming friends with someone who'd been sleeping with my wife, but we were both victims of Sunshine's manipulation, and that created an odd bond between us. Nadia started helping me too, reviewing my credit reports and setting up fraud alerts on all my accounts. She showed me how to freeze my credit so no one could open new accounts in my name, and helped me create a system for monitoring my financial accounts daily to catch any suspicious activity immediately. Carl and I would joke darkly about starting a support group for people scammed by Sunshine, but underneath the humor was real appreciation for having someone who understood exactly what we'd been through. 6 months after Sunshine's arrest, I was sitting in my living room looking at my recovered skeleton keys displayed in their cabinet with a new, better lock. I'd added 3 new pieces to the collection, including a rare Corbin mortise key from 1890 that I'd found at an estate sale. The house felt different now, quieter, but also more peaceful, without the constant tension of Sunshine's presence and lies. I'd changed all the locks immediately after the divorce, installed a better security system with cameras covering every entrance, and set up financial protections that would alert me to any suspicious activity on my accounts. The credit card debt Sunshine had created was slowly being resolved through the fraud disputes, and my credit score was starting to recover. I'd learned to trust my instincts about people, to recognize red flags early instead of ignoring them, and to protect my boundaries without guilt. The experience had been awful, but it taught me exactly what kind of relationship I didn't want, and what standards I needed to maintain. I was dating again, casually, taking things slow and being upfront about my past and what I was looking for in a partner. Some dates went nowhere, but that was fine, because I wasn't desperate or settling anymore. I had my house, my collection, my financial security, and a clear sense of who I was and what I deserved. Sunshine was serving her sentence in a state prison 2 hours away, and I never visited or responded to the letters she sent, trying to apologize and explain. Carl told me she'd tried reaching out to him too, but he'd blocked her completely and moved on with his life. The future felt open and honest in a way it hadn't in years, and I was genuinely excited about building something real with someone who valued truth as much as I did.